Hello gamers, here is Mumbai and welcome to another video. Today I will tell you about my experience with Touhou 3D Dungeon, a game I came across while browsing through Touhou fan games on Steam. Released on Steam in 2021 by an indie developer studio, Rabbit Tailworks, Touhou 3D Dungeon is a retro-style platformer set in, as the title says, Touhou universe. The story follows us, the player, who found themselves unconscious next to Hakure's shrine. Being woken up by Reimu, who wants to help us get back to the outside world, we quickly realize that the way there got blocked by an ice barrier. Suspecting who might be behind this, Reimu decides to go on an investigation with us to solve this issue. Later on the road, meeting with Marisa, who decides to join us on this adventure. Overall, the story, like in most retro platformers, is rather simple, serving more as a way to explain all of the gameplay elements. Speaking of, let's talk about the gameplay. To traverse across 4, technically 5 levels of the game, you're given the ability to play as both Reimu and Marisa, letting you to switch between them during gameplay. During the in-game cutscenes, you will also be playing as the player character. Levels range from foresty areas full of wildlife to claustrophobic dungeons to celestial gardens and massive towers. Switching characters is very intuitive and fits into the gameplay pretty well, as both characters have different attacks and special abilities, as well as separate health and stamina bars. Stamina lets you run by repeatedly pressing the Y or triangle button, and it slowly regenerates over time even if the character isn't active. And to replenish health, you need to either die, which I suggest not doing, or get the health pickups that drop from one type of plant you can find across all the levels of the game. But what kind of things can damage your health? Well, beside obvious like falling off a cliff, which I also suggest not doing, the game has a wide variety of different enemies on each level. You've got these dog things, the cat bat things, and all other sorts of stuff. The combat is rather simple, in the first level consisting only of the base attacks, a ground hit and a jump hit, from which Reimu attacks faster, while Marisa deals more damage. I am not going to lie, fighting in this game is junky as hell, as the characters don't automatically lock the targeted enemy, often making you punch the air instead. And some of the enemies, and especially the mole, have very annoying attack patterns that in some instances made me avoid the fights entirely. But let's be real for a second. Is it really a retro-style platformer without abysmal combat system? The enemies also drop the iconic to the series power pickups that increase your overall damage, and you lose portion of the power each time you get hit. Now, the special abilities is when the things get interesting. You unlock them as you progress through the story, and both of them serve as a new way to attack the enemies, but also to help in the exploration. Reimu's ability allowing you to launch yin-yang balls into the enemies and letting you climb places you couldn't reach before, and Marisa's ability letting you precisely shoot into the enemies and map objects from a distance. Now about the levels. As I mentioned before, the game consists of 4 different levels, however the third level has 2 different routes, giving that sort of replayability to the whole thing. And replayability it needs, as you can complete the whole thing in less than 2 hours. Visually, I'd say the levels look really nicely, each one having a unique theming, which do makes me wish the game had more of them, as it would be really cool to see some other places from Touhou. The levels, like in most retro platformers, consist of both combat and puzzle solving mixed together. Yes, you heard that right, the game has puzzle solving elements, requiring the player to use their brain while playing. The puzzles themselves are actually quite satisfying to solve, especially in the third level, which has pretty much no combat elements in it. This is also where the character's special abilities come into play, as some puzzles require you to use them to progress. My only problem with this mechanic is how Marisa's ability is quite underutilized, as you only get it in the last level shortly before finishing the game. The abilities are also used during the game's boss fights, because yeah, the game, like every other retro platformer, has its share of boss fights. 3 to be exact, though the first one could be considered more as a mini-boss, as it's rather short. The other 2 are of course with the game's main antagonist, the strongest fairy in all of Gensokyo, Cirno. And strong she is, having a lot of special abilities and attacks, making her fights one of the coolest parts of the game. From other things that there isn't really much to talk about, we have music and overall sound design, which is overall pretty good. Actions like hitting the enemies with the special attacks have a satisfying feeling to them. And the music itself, while having a lot of royalty-free tracks mixed with some original pieces, works really well and makes each level even more unique. It's also worth mentioning that even though the game only released on Steam, you still need a controller to play it. And that's the whole game summarized. Now that we have it out of the way, let's talk about the things I don't like about it and how could they be improved. Starting with the combat system, which as I said already feels really janky. One of the biggest issues I had is the hit detection, which is just bad. There was a lot of situations in which I was clipping through the enemy, but no hits were registered. Another issue is the overall lack of variety when it comes to combat options, as before unlocking the special abilities, you only have 2 attacks, both of which are also single target. This creates another issue as there's multiple examples when enemies are placed in groups, making it really difficult to fight all of them. An idea how to fix it would be to have a third form of attack that can damage multiple enemies in a wider range, but as a trade-off would consume a significant portion of your stamina. This will make combat more interesting and give more uses to the stamina bar, as it's only used for running, which you won't really do during a fight. Speaking of, I find it quite annoying how you have to constantly mash the Y button to run. I don't really understand what purpose having it like that would serve, so it feels like an unnecessary addition. In fact, this creates a problem during some platforming elements that require you to jump while running, as you have to press the jump button while constantly mashing the run button with the same thumb. The platforming segments also aren't perfect. There are moments where the characters got stuck on the geometry, fallen through the floor, or just in general being quite weird. During the gameplay in the background, you might have also noticed the amazing English translation of the game. Like, I'm sorry, I know speaking English isn't something everyone does, but why not having someone who does speak it well translate the game? It's not like the game has hours worth of content to translate. Like as I said, I completed the first playthrough of it under 2 hours. Surely it would take less than that to translate the game properly. All of that said, the game is pretty fun and I did enjoy my time playing it. Though I wish it was a little longer, as for the current price of 32 zł or $9, it feels quite overpriced to the amount of content given. Though, as I said, the game has 2 alternative routes, as well as a new game plus with all the abilities unlocked from start and many collectibles, which I haven't done, but if you're into fully completing each game, then it's safe to say you're up for around 4 to 5 hours worth of playtime. So to sum it all up, Touhou 3D Dungeon is definitely a unique experience when it comes to Touhou fan games, by quite faithfully recreating the feel of retro 3D platformers with all the good and bad elements of these games. And while junky and quite short, there still is a fun time to be had. And so, thank you as always so much for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye!